this is just a feasibility study, but we're looking at, and also you can't give everyone a car because they don't have the infrastructure to drive it on. And then we realized, we can't, most of our work is creating jobs for people who are unemployed. Here we have to deliver at such a rate, we need another technology. So what we've done here is, we found a German who is growing local hay. He's compressing it under heat to a 6-centimeter board, and we can build 3-story housing at a saving of 40%. So we've had to get into local pre-manufacturing. It's that interface with technology. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Also, we have a problem in Rwanda. Everything comes to Mombasa, and then it goes across 2 corrupt countries, and by the time it arrives, it's 7 times the cost. So we've had to design the new policy for the government to use local materials and to kickstart a building industry. And as an architect, you have to do all of that. You might not even be paid for it, but you have to do it. You have to be a bit crazy too, but it's good. And this is the Strawtech model. Okay? And then, cohesive open spaces. How do you design open space? And then there's certain things that Rwandans do. They like to cook in their backyard. So how can you create the possibility for that? Okay, and then we've just won a housing project. How am I doing for time? No, I'm fine. We just won a housing project which is about to be built, and it was low cost. We've gone further down the pyramid, okay, for the government. And it's really a summary of all the ideas I've been talking to you. How it sits on the topography. You have rainstorms that come down in buckets for an hour and a half, 2 times a year in different seasons. You're on the equator, but you're 2,000 meters. The sun comes on the north and the south face of the building. And it's how you can move across the site with the contours. Okay, so pedestrian greenways that run this way, and pathways that run that way. So you can manage the infrastructure of water. And then low impact design and peri-urban agriculture. How can you integrate that into it? You're educating your client. Courtyards, they can become active spaces, okay, where you can have creches, playgrounds. How do you simultaneously with this build, because community is like a fist. Only 2 things are housing. The other thing is public space. The other thing is health and education. And you're actually educating your client. And how can we actually create these courtyards? The patio. And if you keep it open at the end, you don't have that feeling of enclosure, and you can get very nice movement that's a subsidiary movement that can happen. And you've got a neighborhood heart, you've got a public transport hub, you've got a marketplace, and you look at it as an integrated thing. We have a very bad example next door where they relocated the urban poor. And then my office in Rwanda designed the housing, and we designed this. This is from our office. That's where we collaborate. Where you move across the site on the diagonal, and you use the downslope and the upslope, and you do very much what John Lynn did this morning, where the roof becomes an active piece of raised contour. So you're making public space, and the city just loves this, and how you integrate it with local ways of doing things. And then how you build the architecture. We decided it's a seismic area. We have to actually build in concrete frame. We don't have time to reinvent. We can use a combination of these as the floorboards, and then we can use ordinary bricks as infill, and we can start developing an architecture that maybe is at the low end of the scale. And you go to Mexico City, everybody builds a room 4.5 meters by 4.5 meters. That's what the people do. We've got 4.25 by 4.25 here. And the most sustainable solution. And it only becomes, you can only build capacity in Rwanda construction industry. You can only then use local materials, and you've got carbon savings. So it ties in with the policy of that you need to kickstart a building industry that's not there. And then at the city scale, in collaboration with TAM Architects, we spoke earlier about them from Venice. We did a proposition for the new city, greenfield city on the Nile for South Sudan. With the politics, I don't think it'll ever happen. But what happened is we created a marina. There's the Nile, it's 8 kilometers here. We pulled the water across because we knew you needed to have water. And I took the same idea that I did for the holiday house, which I learned from the Ndebele. And these are 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. Now, I was in Merida in Yucatan at the time we were designing this. And I was busy walking the different squares like this to get the idea of size, because the Spanish were teaching me how to make sizes, because if you've got a plaza and it's more than 120 meters, it loses the sense of scale. So you're always a student. You're learning from first principles, okay? So we did that, and then we thought, rather build these as compact things, and then other things can happen in between, okay? I don't want to dwell on it, but it was a very nice idea, and it's influenced other work that we, then what is an appropriate architecture? So I'm walking the streets of Merida, and I'm turning it into African architecture, but I'm getting the size right of a patio, because we're human beings. Okay? Then, sustainability is an ethos. I work in Rwanda, working with 3 colleagues of mine, ex-partner of Field and Clegg, who won the Sterling Award, Marco Ramage, who came from MIT training on vaulting. We've set up earth, plants, animals, people, a unit where we plug in. I've just turned 70. The people in my office are in their 20s. My 2 sons are architects, they're in their 30s, and these guys are in their mid-40s. So we have this constant interaction, and I'm the craziest of the whole lot. Okay. And then we go to Ethiopia, and in these mountains here, in the peaks there, carved out of the cliff face, are Christian churches. Okay? And we're doing a whole conservation plan for this valley, and I go to site and I measure it up, okay? And I go to the peasants' houses and I see the way they live, and we're trying to get the peasants from not being removed from the landscape by developers. And this is the landscape. And a strange thing happened to me. 2 years ago, I went to the 361 Congress, or 3 years ago, and then I went to see Krishna Ndoshi, who's wonderful. He just moves like a 37-year-old. And he gave me a whole lecture about how in the developed world there's this idea of certainty, whereas in Indian society there's this idea of uncertainty, and certainty breeds its own anxiety, whereas uncertainty is actually a much more creative place to be. And I've just brought Finnish students to Africa, and they've embraced that idea because they come from this place where everything works. It was a wonderful construct. And then the students took me to the Temple of the Sun. And when I was there, they introduced me on the 21st of March, the day after my birthday, to the goddess of architecture, who's Hindu. I spent an hour and a half talking to her. Every single dream of mine has come true since that. I can really recommend it. It just depends how you tune in. And here we are, going up to one of these sacred sites. I took Todd Williams and Billy Tsing here to this exact site 2 years ago. And Billy didn't want to go up, and I said, with hand assistance, you can get up. And it was the most amazing spiritual experience to be in these negative spaces, moving along a ledge that's no wider than this table, and there's a drop of 1,000 feet, and there's no health and safety officer around. But it's safe, I promise you, because you're in God's hands, whoever your God is. And then we started saying, well, what's an appropriate architecture to design in this landscape? And my son did a rendering, which looks like it's real. The client for this has just made a lot of money in Dubai, and I think we're going to build it. I will know when I get home. But when you wake up in the morning, you have this, and when you're up in the mountain and you look down, you don't have this desecration of the landscape. Then this is a school we did with rammed earth and vaults as part of a second story. And it really has to do very much with just organizing time along the lines of the village. 3 buildings, the courtyard, the central space. Okay? And then back to Rwanda and the State House for His Excellency, which all I can do is show you that we looked at this, we looked at the landscape, We looked at how we could take the quilt of the landscape. We looked at how we build in a country of 1,000 hills. And then when we got the Earth Award in London, I got this phone call from Prince Charles asking me if we could do something on his lawn built out of the earth to show the British public. So we fired the project manager and sent him on a bicycle ride in Italy. And then we took our office across and we made tiles like this. And we had 3 weeks to design and do it. We engaged with set designers and we built it. And he phoned me up and asked me if I could make the curves a bit more sexy. So it shows there's hope for humankind. Okay? And the curvature gave it more strength as well, which was fantastic. Okay, so we built it, and everything, including the pallets we made, the bricks, became the exhibition. So it was part of a story. And then a billionaire invited us. I worked with him in Rwanda. He's an advisor, fantastic man. He's a very unorthodox American. He was born and bred in Afghanistan. And he's a changed man. He has 10 children, all are homeschooled. He said, I have to move into a corporate environment because people want to invest with me, but I hate the corporate world. I hate the furniture. I hate the designers. I hate the ceiling. I hate everything about it because it's so pretentious. I want it to be like putting on an old boot. I want your brief is it has to be between home and a startup builder in a garage. You know, when you go to a garage in Mexico and they're busy working on an old machine, or Africa. So it's quite a nice brief. And I want to be able to taste and smell how the architecture is made, because you can't do that in America. Why? Because the labor price is $150 an hour. It's what's happened to Australia. Australia, they can't build with local stuff anymore. They have to build with Gucci, shiny materials because their economy doesn't, their money's too powerful. So we looked at how we could do vaults. We looked at the idea of edicule, and he said, I want my office to be like a street. So I come here, and this is a casita where I can sit and talk. I don't just want a boardroom. So what we did is we designed this vuvuzela of space, so it stops you acoustically. We grew plants like baragan from the soffit, and in the afternoon, the shadows come across the space. I went and got a tree from his farm that was struck down by lightning, and we turned it into an artwork by cutting it up and getting someone from the Mississippi to do it. And then we put vaults. He's a pilot, so these are like a flock of birds. And then we have rusty steel, not core 10. You know, so we told them, you know, how the Americans didn't understand about why you do this. And how do we make it rusty? I said, you put it outside, you urinate on it, you let the sun come on it, and you get a good pattern, and it tells a story. It's all about stories. Okay, and then he had something to do with Noguchi, so we did a Noguchi pool, and there are the shadows coming across the space, and there's children running around, and there's the vaulted ceiling. And what we did is we went to someone on a farm outside Chicago, and we made the vaults prefabricated, this guy, Eric. And then we took them in, and we made it. And this is all beetle kill. It's wood that Americans throw away because beetles attacked a certain forest. We found one that was burnt, so we're using recyclable material. And inside the edicules, the cupboards, you can tell your personal story about your life. And you can tell his stories. And then we're building this at the moment. It follows the path of a bouncing ball. Those who are from India or Sri Lanka will understand cricket. I don't know if you people understand cricket. But it follows the path of the bouncing ball, and the sponsor is the MCC Cricket Club, and now the MCC balls have this on it. And it's a pavilion. We've just formed the fields. We're starting to build the vaults. But we couldn't get the Rwandan authorities. It has to do with aspirational cultures. When you're a new democracy and you've come from not having, and you get into power, you want to be like America, or you want to be like the Porsche showroom in Stuttgart, or you want to be like Dubai because it means success. And you've got to say to them, no, that's exactly what you don't want. It's not sustainable, and you have to go through that process. So this is built out of Earth. So now Earth is to do with peasants. We don't want to be part of the past. We want to be part of the future. So I'll show you the game we have to play. This is the game we have to play. We had to have dinner with Cameron at 10 Downing Street, We got all the money in one night. And then what we did is we made a table because my partner is an academic, Ramaj. Where's Ramaj? He's here. So we had this little clapped-out old car which we had to get into 10 Downing Street past security because we had the table we had to take in. So it was a wonderful experience. And that's my partner, Tim. But now that Cameron says it's okay, it's okay. In other words, you've got to do something upmarket to convince people that to look sideways at something that's vernacular is okay. It doesn't mean you're looking backwards. And then communicating African's genius to the world. I think I'm running out of time. We won the contract to do the most ancient city south of the Sahara at Axum, 3.5 million years ago. It's at the same time as the Persian, Roman, and Greek empires. Okay? The story of the Old Testament, Queen of Sheba, the story of the Coptic Church, and you suddenly realized how all of them stole from one another, including the Muslims who came and borrowed script and changed it and changed meaning. Very interesting. And we did this amazing exercise, which I can only just hint at. And some of them were gentle little things. What does a tourist do when they come there? You want information? You want to go to the toilet? You want to get something to drink? Okay? And we had three. We had the Axumite route. We had the religious route. We had the Queen of Sheba route. And we had the Old Town route. And what we did is we had to communicate, in Axumite times, you had 500 tons put on your head when you died. You didn't mess around and just have a little cenotaph. Okay? So how do we regain the dignity of that? And how do you, when you come to this ancient tablet here, and you've got something over there, how do you communicate to your parents and yourselves going there, and if you're in a wheelchair, that it can be a nice experience, because at the moment you can't. And sometimes it's a very gentle thing. You've got these thrones. So we had the Germans teaching them how to do cobbles, but they were teaching them the pattern of Nuremberg. And then we'd send the Germans on holiday, and when they were gone, we would make nice patterns. And then they'd come back and they'd say, "Was gibt's?" Yeah. And then how do you design a little museum that disappears? Because you use the way the peasants build to do it. And at the moment, it's an appalling state. Mussolini stole one of the cenotaphs, and then he gave it back in the year 2000, and then they tried to erect it, and they knocked over another one. Anyway, this is how it is, and this is how it was in 1906, and this is how we're proposing it can be. And then we go from 3,500 years to 9th and 12th century in our own country, where we won this competition. This is the oldest example of class structure, where you have the royalty on the hill and the proletariat below. But what do you find? You find Ming pottery. You find Malaysian pottery. So it showed you that there was trade with these countries in the 9th, 12th century. And Africans in Southern Africa have taken this as their place of, it's like getting a knighthood. The president gets the order of Mapungubwe. If you've done great things for your country, you get the order. And remember the gold of Europe in the Renaissance. Those people with turbans were not slaves, they were traders. Off Kilwa on the coast over here in 1503, the Portuguese pulled the carpet on that, and Africa's been exploited since. And the bad story told about it, because they could exploit it, and that's changing now. This is the top of the hill. There's symbolism. It precedes Great Zimbabwe. I know that cans are something that mark the way. You see evidence of 17 different countries from the 9th century to the present. And we couldn't use overt African references as an icon because there was a dispute over land claims. So we turned to nature. And when you look at nature and you look at the cave, all the clues are there. These are my drawings of caves. And when you look at the topography, it's all there. But I want to make a cave architecture. How can I do it? And when you look at nature, a tree and a plant grows a branch or a stem for reasons of economy, not for reasons of style. So how can we design an architecture that is devoid of style, devoid of fashion, and is disciplined by the way it works through the mathematics, which is the code of how we organize space? And the hill is over here. It's where 3 rivers and 3 countries, Zimbabwe, Botswana, come together. And and the Parks Board chose a site near the main road, and you arrive around a hill, and then you cross a wash, and then you have to go up 14 meters. How can your building be a route building that takes you up 14 meters? And then what's the organizing geometry? In the African cultures, there's an equilateral triangle, so I used the equilateral triangle. And then I went to talk to John Uschendorf, who was studying Guastavino's work, and this is a discussion at MIT. It all has to do with the chain. They had the mathematics because we've forgotten how to do it, and we started designing using the discipline of mathematics, not style. And we looked at longitudinal sections. We ended up with this section. We looked at how we couldn't hurt the hillside. I did some drawings of how I imagined this would be and how you could take inspiration from the local trees. And that's how you conceptualize. And then we got women who were unemployed to make tiles and to cure tiles. And then we got men who were unemployed to build little vaults. Now they built these, they stood on them, and they said, how? That's amazing. And then we gave them the big job. And this is Michael Ramage, and this is a New Zealander who worked with the Catalans. And we didn't get any special shuttering. We just took what we had on site, and we started building. One team from one side, one team from the other. The one's better than the other, so the join doesn't meet, but the join becomes art. Okay? And we use this as permanent shuttering. And then I had to say to my English partner, you know, when we have a meeting, we don't go to the Royal Institute of British Architects. You get a beer and you meet him on the front of a pickup and you sort out your problems. Okay? And the clues were there. We had a bad builder. He didn't even know how to get columns level, so you end up as an architect building the building. And what you're interested in is the poetry of how can it be a building that you see 1 minute like an elephant and then you don't see it. And it's like weaving a skin. And then I tried to convince the client that the brickwork was so bad that if we developed this bad brickwork, we could end up being like a baobab tree. But they're Calvinists. They said no. So you negotiate another deal. You let them, you do this, you do rusty steel that you then put rust stop on. Then architecture's got to do with negotiation. And it's about skin. Okay? And then the unevenness. The fact that these are handmade, it gives the feeling of being ancient. If it was terracotta tiles that were perfect, it wouldn't be working. And then this becomes a bit like a friend wrote to me. He said it's a little bit like Leonard Cohen writing about, the light lets the cracks let the light in. And you go to a site and you get goose pimples because it's just so much more magnificent than you ever imagined it to be. And it looks like you planted a seed and it grew as part of the biology. And then Jean Nouvel can spend millions. We just put corrugated sheeting there with sticks on either side and you get the same effect. It's just beautiful. And then the building has an odd sense of scale because it doesn't have any doors that are visible. You're not sure what the scale is. Okay? And you do drawings. And then you use galvanized pipes because it's 6 hours from a big city, but 1.5 hours away there's a farmer who does galvanizing. And so and then your second, you have the cave, and the second ingredient is sombra. It's shade. Shade is God-given, and it makes architecture. It's all about light. Okay? And this is very nice because there's the only tradition Africans have is stone building. And when you walk along here, if you put a hose on it, all the snakes and the scorpions come out, and the children, they love it. And then in the reception, you take some ordinary mesh that you put in the screed, and you be inventive about how because you have to keep it baboon-proof. You can't have a reception where a baboon has a shit from the roof onto your reception desk. You have to close it off. And then, whereas it was float like a billowing sail outside, inside, it was like this. And what was nice about the site, we didn't need security guards because we had a lion that had been kicked out of the Pride who used to roam the site. You had his footprints every night. So the security guards had to take refuge. And when we set the building out, the elephants pulled the pegs out. So it's another reality. Okay. And then you create a cave because Johanni Palasma says a lot of architecture has too much light. Okay? If you want to go into the sacred, you go into the half light. You create the half light. If you have an opening, you just take your digital camera. It doesn't know what to see. You've got to shut the light down. So how do you do that? And it's very nice working with that discipline of mathematics. Okay? And then you go, and also you only need a 40-watt globe to light a vault. We have too much electricity lighting. And then this guy, he's Victor Mokwevo. He's happy because he's had a job, he's acquired a skill, and his daughter who cracks the whip, she's learned something about her ancestors. And you move on. And you go up the hill, and for no money, you build a day visitor center where the 30 chiefs in the area you choose the site with the best cell phone coverage, and then you build these buildings, and these are very nice. I must talk to my two colleagues, Soleno and to John. These are made from the Dogon. Toilets are usually smelly things, especially when people who haven't used them. So you make a whole wall that you can't see in, but you get a beautiful light inside. And then you use shadow. And never mind Turel. What happens to the Tswana people? When your grandparents die, you let the roof fall in, you have the place of the sacred, and you sit in a sky room. The Spanish knew that when you go to Mexico. You sit in a sky room. And how you, with very little skill. And then we're busy here at the moment. In Tanzania, we've just won the contract. This is the site of 3.6 million year old evidence of footprints of our hominid ancestors. This is a site plan I did last week. I was busy trying to color it in, and my son was saying, but Varud wants your images to be sent to him for the presentation. Why, Daddy, you must? I said, I got him to help you. Sorry I took so long. There's the museum we're doing. There's the footprint. And we located the research buildings here. And then when we did some research, the excavations to where we were going to do the buildings, they found an even more important site. And we're now putting the research buildings down here. And when I get home, in 6 weeks' time, we've got to start building these buildings. These are my drawings looking down on the site. The Getty Foundation covered the footprints. The president has told the Getty Foundation, this isn't for American scientists. We want, the Americans had one step for mankind on the moon. We've got the oldest evidence of footprints in the world. We want the people to see them. So we're now working with UNESCO, and I've had to turn the thing from a political project around into something that's not political by setting up a trust with Clinton as the head of the trust. And suddenly, instead of a $7 million US failure, it can be a $120 million success because we're working with UNESCO, we're working with scientists, we're working in the proper way. And you as the architect have got to do that. It's your obligation to do that. These are molds of the footprints. These are drawings of the site and the site for the research. We have this presence on site all the time. And if we're going to do vaults, African elephants, if they come and scratch themselves next to your vault, it'll collapse because it's not designed for that force. It's a very interesting scenario. And we started doing designs, and how do we tell the story of the Rift Valley? How do we tell the morphology? How do we tell the story? Everybody thought that humankind might have started in Africa, but culture started in Europe. Until on the South African coast, we've just found 150,000-year-old evidence of art. So that wasn't the story. How do we develop a new type of architecture out of vaults? And how do we conceive it? And this is where we are at the moment. We have to design to 6.4 on the Richter scale. So we cover only 4% of the bearing, and each one is isolated from the other. Okay? So we're having conversations. I think it's important to show work in process because students always think the work just ends up being at the end. It's part of a process. And these are little drawings for an archive.